But see, that's his holy thing. Maybe God is calling him to do that holy thing. I don't know. It's not for me. God hasn't told me to do that. But it's the way God has called him, perhaps. But we go around judging each other. But see, the most important thing about being holy is that you're not listening and worrying about what other people think. That man was completely oblivious to what anybody thought in that auditorium. And there were 6,000 people there, praising the Lord. And he was praising the Lord right along with them, but no one was standing near him. They all want to get away from that creep. But he didn't care. He wasn't worried about the other 6,000. And that's something about a holy person. They're not influenced by what public opinion. They listen to God. Not what respectable Christians tell them they should do. Not what the establishment says is right. What does God say is right? And that's true of all of our saints in 2,000 years. St. Francis of Assisi, St. Ignatius, St. Dominic, St. Benedict. And so as not to be chauvinistic, St. Catherine of Siena, St. Teresa of Avila. Great women, holy women, not just good women, holy women, who took the whole world on because they knew what God was telling them. They listened to the Father. Now, what's all this leading up to the modern church? Who are you as Catholics listening to? I know the Holy Father's concerned about the American church. Most of the priests I talk to in Europe were concerned about the American church. We're considered a disobedient church now, the disloyal church by our European friends. I spoke to my brother priests from England, from Ireland, from Italy, from France, even from Holland, of all places. They said, oh, you belong to that liberal American church. What do they mean by that? That we were all doing our own thing over here? Do you think it's an unjust judgment? Let's have a look at that from the press. Let's look at Gallup poll. Let's look at what Harris poll says about American Catholics. They were certainly a lot right about the election. They were right on the nut with the election, weren't they? They weren't 1 point out on the presidential election, were they? So I have no reason to believe they're 1 point out on their Harris poll of Catholics. What do they say in their Harris poll of Catholics? 80% of Catholics are practicing contraception. So who are you listening to? We talked about that last night. 65% of Catholics believe in abortion. So who are you listening to? I could go on and on with the moral problems that are concerned. Who are you listening to? And I'm amazed how people pick and choose. They can be very conservative when it comes to liturgy. And they can be ultra-conservative and 100% loyal to the magisterium when it comes to how priests should behave. But when it comes to how you should behave, then they listen to the public. Oh, we priests do it too. We can be 100% loyal when it comes to how you should behave, and then we can say, well, that doesn't apply to us. The Pope's had a touch on us. Who are we listening to if the Catholic population is so disobedient in their own thinking towards the official teaching of the Church? I gave a mission in Chicago a few years back. Very rich, upper-class mission parish. Everyone in that parish was college degrees. We're one of the richest parishes in Chicago Archdiocese. In fact, I think it's one of the richest places in the United States per population. Great big Cadillacs, Rolls Royces, the affluent, the educated, the intellectuals, the elite of America in the Catholic Church. Not your average Catholic, supposedly above average Catholic. The ones with the degrees, the ones who study philosophy, the ones who've been to our Catholic universities, the ones who are leaders in our professions, the ones who are teaching in our colleges, the ones who are the leaders in our medical field, our politicians, our senators, our congressmen, that kind of parish. And they had a survey before I came in, done by a Jesuit. And it listed all the things Catholics are supposed to believe. And they had little boxes that you filled in. Do you believe this or do you believe that? And you know when they finished it? only 30% of the parish accepted all the teachings of the church. Only 30% of the parish accepted all the teachings of the church. So who are they listening to? Who are they listening to? To the next door neighbour? To the bridge club? To women's liberation? To now? To their political party? Who are they listening to? Well, I've got news for you. Your political party is not going to judge you on Judgment Day. Jesus Christ is. Your political party is not going to be up there on the judgment seat saying, "Oh, come on in, boy, you were on our side." Jesus Christ is the judge on Judgment Day. Not the liberal theologians, not the in-group, not now, not Women's Lib. They're not going to be the judges on Judgment Day. I think the one issue that makes me mad and angry is Catholics who believe in abortion. I would recommend every Catholic to read this past month's Liguori magazine. There's an article by a doctor who's proved by video and sonic waves that aborted babies feel pain. That's human flesh you're tearing apart. They took a video of a baby being aborted in the mother's womb and showed the baby's arm being torn off the baby and the baby's head being crushed with a forceps. And that baby didn't feel pain. And then, of course, there's the salt solution. He said, be careful not to get it on the mother or burn her skin. What do you think it did to the baby? And it took the baby 3 hours to die. And the other one was the suction method. What do you think it did to the baby? And 65% of Catholics say that's okay. Then who are you listening to? God is pro-life. And God is going to judge you, not pro-choice. There's going to be no pro-choice people sitting on the judgment throne of God. So listen to who you like right now, but Jesus Christ will be in the judgment seat. Not some movement in the 20th century America to free women. I remember one time when they shot down the plane over Russia, the Korean plane, and 300 lives were lost. What did Russia claim? She claimed she had a right to shoot the plane down. Had it invaded her territory. Well, she had a right, but didn't she have a responsibility? What about the lives that were lost? She could claim her rights, that this is my land, you're over my land, Russia. So we're shooting you down, you invaded our territory. And Americans were indignant about that, even the pro-choicers. What are they saying? That this fetus invaded your territory. That you have a right to shoot it down. Well, Russia shot down 300 bodies and lives. In America, we've shot down 2 million. Who are we listening to? Who are we listening to when it comes to the teachings of the church? Who are we listening to about the sacraments? Who are we listening to about marriage? Who are you listening to? And all these friends that you're listening to and telling you you're okay, and your little crutches and your little bridge parties, your little bingo games, all those people that are with you now won't be with you on Judgment Day except to be judged. Because they're not going to be your judges. Christ is. So you better be listening to him, not to man. One of my favorite saints of all times, on the intellectual level, would be St. Thomas More. I think he's a saint for modern times. He's a saint for right now for America to look at. Because you see, I often wondered myself, if I'd have been alive at the Reformation, and saw the corruption of the church, and saw bishops that weren't holy, and saw priests that weren't holy, and Catholics that weren't holy, and saw all the abuses of God's scriptures, if I'd have lived then, where would I have been? Would I have stayed with the church, or would I have gone with the ones who broke away? Often wonder, what do you think you would have done? You better start, you don't have to wonder too much. Are you with the church now, or are you breaking away? You don't have to wonder, do you? Where are you now? Are you with us or against us? Who are you listening to? And if you're with that majority out there that Harris Paul talked about, you know where you would have been. Well, there was one man who stood up against all that in England, Sir Thomas More. He was Lord Chancellor of England. And as Lord Chancellor, he was the most powerful man next to the King. He wasn't only the highest office in the land, and that was when England was a power. That was when England was the world power, when the sun never set on the British Empire. The two world powers then were Spain and England. And the king, but that's when kings were kings. There was no impeachments in those days. Heads were chopped off, but they were chopped off by the king's order, not by the people's. That's when a king was a king. That's when a king had power. And the highest office any man could have outside the king was to be Lord Chancellor. He had the king's seal, and he put his seal on everything. He was the high Supreme Court judge. He was the power of life and death. He had all the riches. He had all the power. But Sir Thomas More didn't want to be Lord Chancellor. He did it because he was the king's best friend. They were like brothers. There was a great love between them, a great loyalty. And the king wanted him as Lord Chancellor because he knew he could trust him. He was like his brother. He was his best friend. And he knew he was honest. And as you know, at the time, the king had a problem over a wife, didn't he? He wanted a divorce, and the church wouldn't grant one, an annulment. And so the Lord Chancellor's job was to appeal that to Rome, but he wouldn't do it. Rather than do it, he resigned. He resigned the office of Lord Chancellor. He gave up his power. He didn't want to do just good things. He wanted to do God's thing. He wasn't listening to the king. He had to listen to God. He didn't listen to his best friend. He listened to God. And of course the king did marry and made himself the head of the church. And you know, all the bishops of England signed the document except one. The entire hierarchy signed the document that the king was the head of the church and no longer the Pope. And why do you think they all did it? Because maybe some of them really believed it. Maybe some of them listened to each other. Maybe they had to get together and say, hey, what do you think, boys? I think the king's better than the Pope. Let's have the king. Maybe they did. Maybe they did it because they were scared. Maybe because they wanted to save their lives. One bishop, and one bishop only in England, died and stood out. He said, I don't care what the other bishops say. I don't care if they've all signed it. I cannot sign it. The king is not the successor of Peter. And he was executed. He was the Bishop of Rochester. We now know him as St. John Fisher. You know, Sir Thomas More lost all his property, lost his lands, lost everything. Was thrown in the Tower of London. You know, the hardest thing for him in the Tower was that he couldn't go to Mass. That he couldn't be in the presence of the Eucharist. That was his hardest cross. It wasn't the dirt, it wasn't the bad food, it wasn't the chains, it wasn't the rats, it wasn't the dungeon. The thing that Thomas wept about was he could not be in the presence of Christ in the Eucharist, that he couldn't receive Holy Communion. How cheaply we've taken it. And while he was in the dungeon, the last day, the most cruel thing of all, the king sent his wife and his daughter to beg with him to sign that document. See, it was important for the king that he signed it. Because he wanted his best friend to put it. Because the only one we had honest, do you realize, by the way, he's the only lawyer that's ever become a saint? But he wanted his signature on it because he was an honest lawyer. And England knew that, the world knew that. But he couldn't sign it. And his wife was getting to him, she said, why are you doing this? You know, there's a parallel here right now. People are suffering in the prison for pro-life. John Ryan, David Floyd, Anne O'Donnell. How many of us could do that? There's your modern Thomas More. You've got him right here in Brixton. People that are putting their mouth in their life where their mouth is. People that are in prison right now for what they believe is right, not because of what the world says. And Thomas More did that. And I'm sure the hardest thing for John Ryan would be if his wife didn't believe in him. That's why it's important to him that his wife does. I bet if his wife went to him crying and said, "Come out, John," that would be a hell of a thing to do. He'd be torn, wouldn't he? Because he loves her. And that's what they did to Thomas More. His wife said, "If you love me, come out of here. If you love me, sign that paper. You've proved your point. You've proved everything. The world knows what you believe. Come on out now and come back to me." And his daughter cried too. He said to his wife, "Meg, if I come out and sign that paper, how many more years' life can you guarantee me?" "Oh," she said, "Thomas, you're worth another 20 years yet." He said, "You want me to gamble eternity for 20 years here?" Who was Thomas listening to? He wasn't listening to his wife. He wasn't listening to his children. He wasn't listening to his best friend, the king. He wasn't listening to the English public. He wasn't even listening to the bishops. He listened to God. He listened to God. He had to follow his own conscience. That's why he's a man for all seasons. And the following day, he was let out in the tower block. First thing he did was to forgive his executioner. He never even had the privilege of having a priest when he died. He forgave his executioner. He said, "I die the king's good friend, but God's first." You know, even Protestants honor Thomas More now. Oh, the Anglicans in England don't call him St. Thomas More. They still call him Sir Thomas More. But one of the greatest heroes in England is Sir Thomas More. Not only by the Catholics, but by the Protestants. Because he was a man of conviction. Because he's a man who listened to his God, not to public opinion. Who's forming your opinions in the church? Where are you getting it from? And if I'm going to be listening to man and not God, then Christ is going to say to me what he said to Peter. "Get behind me, Satan. For it's to man that you're listening, not to God." And each of us has an opportunity to open ourselves to God and to ask God, what is God's will for me? When I know what God's will is for me, and then I live it with his help and with his power and with his grace, then I'll be holy. And so will you. Who are you listening to? Let us pray.